Hi, welcome to the Gentleman's Jury. I'm your host, Robbie, and with me today is my guest, William.
Hello?
And we're going to be talking about the Breast and Brightest initiative.
Yes, absolutely. Um, so this this initiative essentially started with the Ronald Reagan administration. He was president from 1981 to 1989, and in 1984, Ronald Reagan nominated Eric Bloch from IBM to succeed Edward Knapp to become the next director of the National Science Foundation, NSF. This is the first time that someone like Eric Bloch was the head of the NSF. The NSF was founded by Abraham Lincoln, so it had gone a long time with only uh, uh, people strictly from academia heading the NSF, people that graduated with their doctorates, did the postdoc, did the thesis, uh, conducted research, published papers, and then through academician and their relative success, they were nominated to become the head of the NSF.
So,
Eric Bloch, yeah,
sorry, I was right before you kind of get more into Eric Block here. I've done a little bit of, real quick reading. Why is it so strange that an engineer like Eric Brock, who had helped make the IBM's first supercomputer, become the why was it so different for him to be the head of the um,
right,
NAS
NSF.
NSF? Sorry.
No, absolutely, yeah. So Eric Bloch didn't come from academia; he came from industry. He wasn't a researcher. He didn't. He wasn't known from his success from academia, from publishing papers, from doing critical peer review, and the standard process by which you get uh, recognized and promoted, essentially, uh, or nominated to be the head of the NSF. Eric Bloch achieved his success in industry, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. However, it came with this large frame shift, and this is because Eric Bloch didn't have the he didn't have the care for the scientists and the scientific community that other people from academia would have had.
Okay, so the real difference then is more in the path of profession than in what he did. So just to kind of clarify, you're saying it's more because he came from the industry and not because he was critically acclaimed academically, and
Right. He was
that's
he was in research and development in IBM. He wasn't a scientist by the strict sense, and he didn't work with scientists peer to peer. If he did work with scientists, he would be employing them to uh, to achieve something or extract something from them, their knowledge. Right? He wasn't himself a scientist, so he didn't have scientists at mind when he was the head of NSF.
okay. All
So
right. So
that's the main difference.
okay, thank you for clarifying. You can, go ahead and kind of continue with. You're a lot more knowledgeable in this subject, which is why we brought you on. So if you want to
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah. So the NSF is the body that was developed by the government, and it's government held and government funded. There's another body, the National Academy of Sciences, which isn't part of the government. And these two bodies work hand in hand. They sort of what bridge private and government research, right? The NSF, National Science Foundation, and the NAS. In 1986, I believe, the NAS conducted an internal study where they looked at the supply and demands for STEM PhDs and found that the salaries of scientists and engineers would eventually hit six figures. The salary showed the salary data showed that the real PhD level pay began to rise after 1982. It was about $52,000 a year to $64,000 a year in 1987. So it increased $12,000 within that 5 year span. Uh, One of the sets of salary projections showed that it would reach about $100,000 around the year 2000. So a national, from a nationalistic perspective, you would think, well, this is now subjective because this is my opinion. From a nationalistic perspective, you would think something along the lines of scientists are getting paid more money because we need scientists more, right?
Right.
So Eric Bloch, who utilized scientists more as a tool and recognized them less as a peer-to-peer connection, he thought something along the lines of, this can't be. How are we going to avoid paying six figures for postdocs, PhDs, and higher salaries for graduate students? How can we fix this? So Eric Bloch and Peter House. Peter House was the director of the Policy Research and Analysis Division of the NSF. Uh, and the National Academy of Scientists worked together to fake a shortage of scientists and engineers. So so Peter House and Eric Bloch are the ones who sort of came up with the genesis of this idea.
So, real quick then, right? Because
Yes.
we understand that Eric Bloch didn't have the same kind of respect towards scientists that maybe his predecessor, I believe that was Edward Knapp, who
Right.
came from academia. He obviously didn't have the same respect for scientists and postdoctorates that most people who have held his position had. But um, how would a Peter House have a I feel like if he was a director of policy research and analysis for that branch, you would think that he would have at least maybe come from academia as well, and should have had at least it might not have thought along the same lines as, oh well, why would we want to pay our scientists less? Like why would he have if why would he have probably sided with Eric on that?
Right. I don't know the qualifications to become the director of policy research. It's very well he might have been a scientist. However, Peter House, as the director of policy research and analysis, was in a subcategory of strata underneath the head of the NSF. So if you think of Eric as like the CEO of the National Science Foundation, this is a really rough analogy, but Peter House wouldn't be like the chief financial officer or CFO. He would be well below Eric on the strata. So if Eric wanted to do something, however he worded it, he didn't necessarily have to convince Peter that this is what they were doing. He
Okay,
might have
so
asked Peter, like, hey, what are the repercussions if we do this? Or, like, what are your thoughts? But Eric could do this with or without Peter. It just happened to be with Peter.
Okay, so kind of keeping in line with the analogy, then Peter was more of an employee than he was more than a peer.
He was more like middle to upper management uh, instead of someone in your executive role or a chief role.
Okay.
So
Um,
that's a good way to look at it.
okay, yeah, I was just curious because it wouldn't have made sense for someone like Peter House, who I believe did come from academia, to have looked at that and been like, yeah, no, that looks like this is a real problem.
Right.
So, go ahead. So I didn't mean to cut you off there. Go ahead and continue.
They feigned incompetence by subtracting the demand curve and said, let's And they basically said, let's fake a demographic supply crisis where we wouldn't have enough scientists. They messed with the economic machines, and they inflated the new pay for STEM professionals to be outrageous, something that would actually cause like a demographic supply crisis. So they were essentially saying no one's going to be able to afford any PhD or any PhD students. No graduate students, which are minimally students, right? Like when you get into a graduate program, for the first year of that program, you're basically a student. After that, you're a cryptic labor force. But not, but not at this time. That's more of the present time.
Okay.
In 1980, this wasn't the case, and I'll get into that. The fake shortage allowed us to pass the Immigration Act of 1990. This increased the total overall immigration status, provided, well, it did a lot of stuff. It provided family based immigration visas, it created five distinct employment based visas, uh, and it also, most importantly, it passed the H-1B visa. This H-1B visa allows U.S. employers to temporarily employ foreign workers. These specialty contractors or specialty occupations requires the application of specialized knowledge, uh, something like a bachelor's degree or equivalent, to work in the United States. The duration of the stay would be like 3 years. You could extend it to 6 years. And this visa that they passed in the 1990s allows Chinese citizens to populate all labs and places a proctoscope in the university system. This is where we do our research. Now, China has the benefit of everything that comes from an authoritarian government, and we're giving them the innovative intellectual property, which is a key benefit that comes from a free society by allowing those citizens to populate our labs and reduce the pay rate of our scientists and our graduate students.
Right. And so real quick then, right? Because you're kind of getting into the you know what we're going to start feeling here soon. I mean, at least that's what I'm gathering from this. We're about to get into how that affects us now. One of the
Right,
questions then, right, is I understand that Eric Block didn't want to pay them six figures for postdocs and PhDs and everything.
right. He had like a green eye shaded view of the world. He thought that paying scientists figures would be bad for businesses like IBM, right? Which is what he's affiliated with.
Right. And obviously they got in the economist Miles Bullen to help them out, and they feigned incompetence and everything. How did they manage to commence the sorry, not commence, convince the Reagan administration to kind of go along with this? Because I mean, obviously he must have been pushing for this for a while now. Um, so and at some point you would think the Reagan administration might have at least tried to double check the numbers or anything. So I'm just curious where you thought that how they could have managed to
Right, right,
actively do. And,
right. So the people that double check the numbers are the NSF and the National Academy of Science, the NAS.
oh, okay, so they basically just
Right. So they convinced. So they, the people who do the research and fact check, are the people who brought this quote unquote problem to Congress and said, "Hey, look, no one's ever going to be able to afford scientists because we're going to pay them a feigned inflated pay rate that will harm businesses." And they convinced Congress to pass legislation in the Immigration Act, which you might want to look this up. I believe the Immigration Act was started in the late 1700s or the early 1800s. And this was an expansion of that act. And in the expansion of the act, the main thing that the NSA and NFS wanted to add in there was the H-1B visa.
Okay, and that's so. I'm just kind of go. And the Immigration Act was signed into law in May 1924. Just so you know.
1924.
Yeah,
Okay, that's much more recent than I thought. I thought it was earlier than that.
yeah. No, it was signed into law in May 24. But the from what I'm gathering from this, then right is this issue or this the issue that we're about to kind of get into here could have been avoided if we had kind of more of a checks and balance system on the data that they were supplying to us by having it run through another set of another body.
Right. There's only two bodies that equivocate on these statistics, and that's the government held body, then NFS, and the private sector, which is the NAS.
Right, and Eric Bloch being the head of the
Yeah,
NSF
and
was easily.
you're saying there should have been a third party in there.
Yeah, or just yeah, someone who might not be as associated with the National Science Foundation or sciences in general, someone more I don't know, uh more.
Okay, let's travel down this road for a second. So a non-science affiliated person to pair up with the two science research uh, bodies,
Right.
right, to check them.
Yeah,
Who would work? Okay, let's come up with a hypothetical name for this third entity. What would you call them?
um I mean, if they're dealing with STEM and not or um I'm not yeah, I'm not sure who you
Just come up with the name though.
like the the National Analytical Association or something like that, right? The NAA. So like a team of like a government ran analytical body that when and they might not just pair up with just like the NSF or the NSA or not the NSA but the
NAS.
NAS. Um, it
It
could be
gets
like another
confusing.
body that when you try to bring forward analytics like this, they can go and they're basically just there to ensure that you're not trying to feign incompetence.
Okay, so who would staff the NAA?
Um, Probably people in the math field,
Okay,
analysts, things like that,
so the STEM field stands for science, technology,
engineering and math.
engineering, and mathematics.
Right.
Right. So you're going to have doctors of mathematics in the NAA.
Yeah.
So you're going to, these are essentially scientists.
I understand that. It was more like I was just trying to think of a solution for that
Right.
particular problem because as it stands, it sounds like something like this could happen
You would
again.
need you want a fact checking agency.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand what you're going at. I just thought it was interesting. I wanted to bat it around a little bit.
And yeah, it's I just you get and this obviously isn't the first little bit of someone bringing forward false or feigned evidence of a crisis that could happen or a supposed crisis in this case, right?
Right.
um, so if we could find a way to create
This
another body, and it might not even have to be a government body, it could be you know
this specific. I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but this specifically is the forced intentional. I'm not sure exactly how to phrase it. This is the first time someone has intentionally uh, sub created a subterfuge within the NSF.
right. I'm not saying specifically for the NSF it being another
Right.
time. I'm saying there are probably multiple cases in other bodies that have
Right.
more than like real easy one, right? The I can't think of the body right now that hands out government contracts and things like that. But when they go and check how much something costs, and they pass out that contract to somebody, and they go, "Oh, well, this isn't right because we won't, that deadline won't work," so they have to extend that contract for whatever reason, even though
Right.
they're actively just sitting there waiting. You know,
Yeah.
it is something similar to that, where you have another body that goes, "Well, that's not right because we've already, you know." It doesn't just pass through one or two people. It actively gets checked, as you know.
Right.
So I'm not sure what body we could do for that, or how we could do that, but that's the general idea, is
Yeah.
to stop more attempts at
Right.
feigning.
Right. I don't think there is a specified body for handing out contracts. I mean, there might be for specified like military contracts, but like what happened recently with the whole debacle with uh, Fauci is the fact that he was the head of the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases, and he assigned grant money to this guy, and I'm blanking on his name right now, but Fauci assigned grant money to this guy, and this guy subcontracted it essentially to the Wuhan lab in China, and so that's like there's not. I'm just getting at the fact that there's not one specific body that
No,
hands out.
no, right. Like, obviously, like, one of the big things that I realistically stand against, um, that I'll cover kind of in another episode, is they're actively pushing out grants for the 1619 project, but that's done through the educational branch of government. Right? It's clearly not just assigned to one body, but I and I guess I may have worded it wrong when I trying to go through that hypothetical, because I knew that there's not one branch that does that. But the point
Right,
I'm trying to the point I was trying to make was, maybe we should try and funnel everything through a centralized process that goes and looks at, like, the realistic, like, in the case of what we're talking about, right, the realistic
right,
economic issues that could arise from scientists getting paid, like, I don't know the exact figure they were probably trying to say that they'd be paid at in 2000, but it clearly wasn't nearly. It was clearly a lot higher than 100,000, because the demand would be too low.
right. So I that and I think I emphasized China too much right off the bat. Um, I'm going to backstep here just a little bit and try to try to explain exactly what Eric Bloch was doing. He wanted to help out businesses in America, and in a very short-sighted way, he did this because businesses that need research and development have to have scientists and they have to have labs that work at incredible paces, and they have to be able to do that with low costs if they want to be competitive, right?
Right.
So instead of paying American scientists and American graduate students what they would be expected to be paid by market forces, he allowed or he passed the H1. He essentially headed and passed the H-1B visa in the 1990s Immigration Act, which allowed other people from other countries, not just China, but everywhere else,
Like India.
to come in. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
to come in to our universities and uh, increase the output of scientists and increase the output of postdocs and increase the output of graduate students. So now you're flooding the market with scientists. And when you flood the market with anything, that thing, that item becomes cheaper,
Right.
right? So he, Eric Bloch, wasn't seeing past the idea that scientists would be cheaper, and he might have thought of I'm not Eric Bloch, so I can't tell you what he thinks, but he might have thought something along the lines of an America with more scientists is a better America, or something along those lines. And businesses that don't have to pay that much means more business or
Right.
more
His.
advancement in products, right?
Right.
There's a way to rationalize it. But what happened was China specifically flooded all universities, Oxford, Harvard, Yale, MIT, Princeton, with their best and brightest, which is why Harvard and Oxford and all these other Ivy League institutions have specified restrictions against Asians who apply, because they apply and they have such high academic standards, or they have such high academic success, that they have to raise the standards so not 100% of all of Oxford students are Asian. Because if everyone had the same standards with the applicants, if all applicants had to cross the exact same bar, Harvard would be 90 to 100% Asian, like flat out. Which is, and so that's Harvard's slight um, uh, combat against what's going on, even though they might not actively know why they're doing it. They just know that they don't want 100% Asians
Right,
in their school
and
because that might
another
look bad on them.
part of that would, as you said, it would look bad on them. Would be, diversity wise, it'd be like, well, you're not taking in
Right.
this particular group of people, or this, and that's interest. So an interesting question that pops up from that, right? Because obviously, a lot of these Chinese students look super good when they apply. Is, do you think that they're tampering with, some of those transcripts, maybe some of those things that make them
They
look like they're, because China has access to all of that, being an authoritarian
right,
government.
and they might, but I don't think they have to, and I think they perform well enough in American universities where that wouldn't be a major concern. The main thing is that the people who are getting the visas in these graduate programs are people who are not U.S. citizens. These are the vast majority of them are Chinese citizens that have visas for America. They cannot stay in America. They have to go back unless some of them, not all of them, the vast majority of them don't become citizens, but some of them do, and some of them might want to. But and many other people do, that the Chinese Communist Party, if they want you to come back, they'll leverage you to come back any way that they can, right?
Right.
So let's say you, like Eric Block, oh well, let's say you're Chinese, right? And you uh, get this visa and you come over to America and you're in an engineering field and you get your PhD in engineering and they extend your H-1B visa from 3 to 6 years and you go to IBM like Eric Block and you find out what IBM's doing and then you start applying for citizenship. Or maybe you don't and you go back to China and then you innovate in China instead of in America. Let's say you apply for citizenship and China's like, no, we don't want you to become a citizen of America. We want you to come back and innovate in China. You don't really have a choice because if you try to fight back, they'll be like, well, Robbie, your family still lives in China. So unless you want them, put in internment camps like the Uyghur Muslims, or put in forced labor factories, or their organs harvested, or
Yeah,
something.
something horribly done to them because they have that
Exactly.
leverage.
Exactly. So they have ways of getting their population that they want back, and they typically don't do that specifically unless you've said something outright about the Chinese Communist Party or you're a public figure. But that still leaves the realm of possibility open for the vast majority of H-1B visa Chinese citizens to return back to China with all of the knowledge and R&D experience and innovate in China. Because this proctoscope in our labs, this is like China doesn't have to compete with us scientifically now.
Right.
They know everything. Go ahead.
No, right. I talked about this a little bit in I don't remember if it was my last. No, it was the episode before that. How they're at this point. Part of the reason that you uh, this subject came up in that episode is because they're essentially 12 hours behind us because of this.
Right. Yeah. They know everything we know as soon as they wake up 12 hours later.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
like you can't stay competitive. You
No.
can't stay competitively ahead of them. They're just basically trailing us, and then because they're an authoritarian government who can, you know, force your family to work in a sweatshop anyway because that's what they decided to do for pennies on the dollar. Now they're economically out producing us, making their goods cheaper and more attractive to our business owners.
Right. And the only thing that I haven't seen China be fully self sufficient at is the manufacturing of high end microchips, which only two or three factories in the United States are able to do. It's some like sci fi technology that they have in these factories. It's extremely advanced and it's very hard to replicate. And that's like one of the big things that happened with the embargoment of microchips into China. These like highly advanced microchips, or the same microchips that we're putting in our supercomputers and our F-35s and all the high end stuff that we're making right now.
Right. Um, so kind of continuing on your thought process, then now that the NAS and the um the
NFS.
NSF has
Yeah, it gets complicated.
has
Yeah, and you can't forget about the NAA or the NAA.
right, now that they've kind of allowed these students or these Chinese visa workers into Oxford, Harvard, Yale, MIT, Princeton, and then they go into IBM or NASA or some other
Right,
company.
and it's not just these Ivy League schools, but like that's the target. If they don't get in these, they can go to Oregon State University, Ohio State University, any other university in America.
Right, and then they get they flood our market for scientists, and then they go back. Um,
Yes.
and then we've kind of talked about how that affects us in a way. How do we you know I guess how do we kind of roll some of that back then?
Well, it would be through the legislative process, or we would have to specify. Well, this would also be in the legislative process. So you could either remove the H-1B visa, or you could amend the H-1B visa. Uh, the amendment of the H-1B visa would probably sound something along the lines of uh, if you're committing atrocities or rivaling us in power, your students cannot study at our universities, right?
And I mean that makes sense. I mean, one of the one of the issues with that, right, is how in bed with China our current government is because of the you know way our economy works and how these people get their money to be elected and everything. So it's interesting to try. You said the amendment process would probably be the what's the neutral ground, the compromise road for
Right.
that. Um, and I mean, and I mean, we've talked a lot about the bad of the H-1B visa. From what you've kind of explained how it works and everything. It does allow people from like poor countries like South Africa or
Yes.
Brazil or something to really earn a chance at a much better life. So
Right.
I don't know if just straight up removing the H-1B visa would benefit us as much as what you've kind of suggested, a legislative amendment, especially
Right.
against countries that commit atrocities like like World War II level atrocities like China.
Yes. Um, but like what you said at the start of this episode, uh, this was based off of the Best and Brightest initiative, which was the slogan as they passed this through Congress. The NSF and the NAS spun these narratives saying we need the best and the brightest in America, or science knows no boundaries, or science is international. And like the main point I want to drive home here is this was a subterfuge generated by the NSF and the NAS specifically for underpaying doctors or people with doctorates, scientists, graduate students, and postdocs.
Right, and that, interestingly enough, their idea of, helping, or Eric Bloch's, and I'm generalizing what his idea probably was, because like you said, you can't really think what he was thinking, but
Right,
he essentially said, "Oh, this will be really good for American business because we don't have to pay our R&D development teams as much in order
right,
to stay competitive." But what he really did was go, "Well, now we don't have to pay our R&D teams basically anything because someone else in a different country will do it for us. The only issue is now we're not competitive."
right. And an unintentional outcome of this is now research and development labs can take a picture of the lab and say, look at my lab and look at how wonderful or wonderfully international it is. Look at my diversity in this lab. But what they're really selling is to people who are applying for these H1B visas is they're selling immigration instead of selling diversity to the public.
And I mean, I guess you've really hit the nail on the head of like the key issue with this initiative is that it promotes immigration and pulling from the world's, and I'm not saying some of these people aren't as intelligent as they are, but from the world's supposed best and brightest, and we've essentially said, well, now Americans are more like, the second, you know or maybe even the
Well,
third consideration for this.
talent is hard to find anywhere in the world. I just believe that a democratic republic such as we have now inspires that talent to come to the forefront more. And I do believe that we should allow some amount of H1B visas or something similar to this, homologous to it, to enter into our academic universities. With that being said, there should be requirements and there should be, like we said, there should be compromise between what nations we allow their citizens to apply and which ones we deny outright.
Right, and I agree, because it not only does it, allow us to get some of the world's best and brightest to come to the forefront to help us out, but if they do decide to go home, um, some of
Right.
those other countries
The,
now have someone who's worked in a really competitive economic environment and could try and,
right. America doesn't. America already has the best and brightest. No, that's not exactly right. America has the best and brightest on average compared to any other country because of a mixture of the population and the and or government style. But I don't want to sit on this too much. Uh, back to what we were saying, or back to what we were talking about with the outcomes of what this has like wrought on scientists and the underpaid or relatively underpaid work now. Uh, would you be interested in discussing that?
yeah, no, absolutely. I get on some of these tangents because I hear, this idea that maybe what we're trying to sell is that, we're not trying to promote our citizens as much as we are other citizens, and that's not necessarily true in this case. It's just like, when you
Right.
look at the issues that we face in today's current climate, that tends to be one of the forefront thoughts, because it's easier to manipulate a population that you bring in than it is a population that's already there.
Absolutely. They use these false narratives to try to manipulate the public to get a predicted outcome.
Right, and that's kind of why I stuck on that. But go ahead. I'd love to know more
Okay.
about what it's done to our scientists.
Okay. PhD student salaries. This is I'm reading this off of the MISC information and labor statistics I have at the bottom. the PhD student salaries for the labor force, uh, they averaged in 2020 versus all, versus, uh, so we're going to need to cut this out. I'm stuttering way too much here. So the PhD student salaries for 2020 averages across all professions or across all disciplines is $32,194, which means the average PhD student, graduate level student that's doing labor is getting paid roughly $32,000. And this varies depending on discipline, but this is the average across all disciplines.
Right.
Compare that to 1987, 3 years prior to the legislation being passed. They were getting paid, uh,
It's at about 62,000.
yes, they were getting paid $519 a week, which adjusted for inflation is 11,900 or $11,098 a week, which is an annual salary of about $62,000.
Right, and that's essentially that's not quite double, but you're getting close to doubling
Right,
what we're paying them now.
right, and this is specifically PhD students, graduate level students. So students back in 1987 were making in today's dollars $62,000, and now in 2020 they're making half that.
Right, and can you attribute some of and one of the things that I commonly hear as being younger is that we don't make nearly as much as our parents did, or why aren't we buying houses like our parents did and everything? Do you think that because because the H-1B visas affects more than just scientists. I mean, we're talking specifically in the realm of science. They're also getting into engineering jobs and things like that.
Everything within the STEM fields.
Right. Which falls into a pretty broad category once you break it down.
Yes,
Do you believe that that's part of the reason why we're facing some of the economic problems we are now?
specifically within the STEM fields, I attribute this almost completely. I mean, it's a multi-varied
No,
uh,
right, but
problem,
I'm
but this is this is one of the main variables specifically within the STEM fields.
right, and but that was kind of what I'm getting at, because a lot of students complain, or I shouldn't say complain, reasonably argue that some of the reasons people don't go to college is because you can't pay back what you're putting in,
Right.
and
The
I'm trying to attribute some of this factor to that.
right. The debt that you accrue is outrageous, but that the debt you accrue has been inflating since I believe the 1970s, 1980s, and that correlates strongly with the inflation in uh, not admissions, but not accounting.
Um, I
It starts with an A. One second. God, we're gonna have to cut this part out too, Robbie. I'm going to make you do a lot of work tonight. You know that. Um, but there's it correlates strongly with the inflation of the employment rates of the colleges as well. They employ a bunch more people to do essentially record keeping, and I don't think that that's the main cause of the inflation of colleges and universities, but I believe that that's again one of the main variables.
right. Um, so do you have, like, if we kind of stuck with, instead of following Eric Block's advice, right, and or I shouldn't even say advice, his little feigned attempt to flood the market, how do we not follow that? How much do you think that PhDs might have been worth, or like being paid now? Do you have any?
Well, their predictions on the original study, which you can find, I should have brought that with me, go out to I believe 2010, and at 2010, a PhD, a postdoc, would be making somewhere around like 140, 150,000, which is substantially more than the average postdoc right now.
Right. No, you're talking almost 4 times the average postdoc right now.
No, yeah. So the stats that we just read off, or they're not postdocs. They're graduate level
Oh,
students.
sorry.
Yeah.
So
So a postdoc is after you finish your thesis and everything.
okay, so
A graduate student is anywhere between bachelor's and doctorate, and after you get your doctorate, you're a postdoc.
okay,
Yeah. Um. Right now, uh, in 2020, the average. Well, that's not right now. That's last year. But the average doctorate in various STEM fields is increasing, though not at the rate that it should be. Someone who obtains a doctorate in physics would receive, on average, $122,000 a year. In mathematics, they would receive $105,000 a year. And if you get a doctorate in OChem, something specified like that, you would be receiving on average $77,000 a year. This is average entry level salary as a postdoc.
okay. So it's. I mean, that's still quite a bit of money,
Yes,
but it.
that, but you could be making significantly more. These are people who have gone to school for 8+ years and then get out of school with massive amounts of debt, and the variation in pay actually increases in above and decreases below the variation I just told you. So if you get into some in like a medical field, you can get into like immunology is like highly valued right now. So you could get paid like $200,000 if you get a doctorate in immunology. But if you get a doctorate in something like topology, you would be making something incredibly skimpy, such as like 36,000, I believe, is what I read.
Okay, so it's very it varies a lot, and it definitely goes based on the needs right now, because if
Right.
someone in, I believe you said immunology, we
Yes.
enter a time where everyone's really healthy, and we're not really looking to immunize that many. I don't know exactly what immunology studies, but essentially they're not as valued right now. You're looking like they're
Right.
gonna drop into the not.
Well, I think that they're a pretty stable field, but I do believe though that they're partially inflated right now due to COVID-19 and
Oh,
such.
okay. And that makes sense. I was just trying to give a reference of a so someone like say with a PhD in math that specifically focuses on. I'm not very familiar with all the fields of science or STEM, but someone in like topology or something where it's a little bit more valued now. It can decrease rapidly
Right.
because of the
Well,
variance. Is kind of what you're going for.
no, no. So what I'm going for here is a doctor in physics should be making substantially more than what he's making currently. And this is because the market's flooded with with graduate students, postdocs, etc. We've been over this,
Right.
uh, but an average entry level uh, postdoc making $122,000 a year doesn't sound bad until you look at all of the money that they have to pay back and the value that they're contributing to society, right?
Right.
Any and all innovations that you see, especially in medicine, come not from biologists. They come from people that work in physics.
Okay. So okay, I see what you're saying then. Where
Right.
right you're
Like like the CAT scan, the MRI, the functional MRI, X-rays. These are all of these machines that doctors use, biologists use. They are all invented by people who studied physics, like uh, von Leeuwenhoek, the man who polished the eyeglasses of a telescope and turned it downwards to view these small things called animalcules that he captured in a lake outside of his house. He was a physicist, that invented the microscope.
Okay. Oh, and wow, interesting. I didn't realize that biologists didn't play as much of a role in the development of medicine as physicists.
Yeah,
That's
the vast majority of technologies created come from the physics field. So cross pollination of fields is great, but most of the discoveries were, originated from physics, like the X-ray machine. What was that? I'm sorry. One more time. Oh yeah, yeah. You can you can make physics fractal.
so. Thanks for thank you for that. What we're um gonna kind of wrap it up here. If that's okay with you, unless you have a little bit more.
No, absolutely. Yeah,
All right. So
that's fine.
I thank you for coming on. You've always been a really big supporter of the podcast, and I appreciate that. And I'm glad we finally got time to sit down and go over a subject that you're obviously extremely knowledgeable about and passionate about.
I really love the fact that you're doing this, Robbie. I think your podcast, if you stick to it, will be a success.
So, and I appreciate that. Um, next week on Tuesday, which is my typical. This one will actually come out Saturday. I didn't mention that. And if I ever do a special again, now people know it'll be Saturdays that they'll drop. Um, Next Tuesday, I'll be kind of going into more of the the 1619 project, specifically the way education's trying to frame it and push for it. So I thank you again, William,
Thank you.
and I hope to you guys have a wonderful rest of your day.